When we think about leading organizations and churches, ministries, and teams, we will likely think about the organization we each lead. You may lead a church, you may be thinking about your church, or you're a parent, and you're thinking about your family, or you work for a large organization and are thinking about the part of the organization you lead. Perhaps you're a member of a small team posted far from the center or the top of the organization. It might be difficult to imagine yourself having vision for the whole organization. Who am I to have vision for world vision, for example? But I want to talk specifically about the middle manager role, someone who is not at the top of the organization and whose name is not on the corner office door. The person has a boss, but also supervises people and, for her own part in the organization, is responsible for resourcing, leading, managing, and carrying out the vision with her team and in service of its functions and in purpose of the large organization under the authority of her supervisor. An ancient poem has been written to describe the ministry, the choices, the values, the lifestyle, and the habits of such a capable team leader, though you may not know it by that name. So let us read what is perhaps a familiar passage with an unfamiliar lens and see if the selection has anything to teach us. I'll be reading from Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31. A capable wife, who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with her willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from far away. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and tasks for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid for her household when it snows, for all her household are clothed in crimson. She makes herself coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the city gates, taking his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She supplies the merchant with sashes. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her happy. Her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the city gates. This poem describes a woman whose plate is full. She lives a responsible and fruitful life. She rises early and works late, and everyone around her thrives. When you read this description, it does sound more like propaganda or a resume for an award nomination than an actual living person. But to take the passage seriously, it's worth first noting that she has multiple servant girls and capital accumulated enough that when the occasion arises, she goes out and buys a field and plants a vineyard. So this is a woman of some means. So rather than not taking this seriously as a description of an omni-capable wife, I would like to generalize it a bit, in fact, making it gender neutral. This is a fitting description of someone who leads a ministry, whether a large youth group or a mid-sized church. Team leader would undoubtedly describe a 10th century before Christ women of means, with land to manage, hence farm workers, and a large house to manage, hence servant girls, and economic enterprises to manage with a variety of entrepreneurial activity noted. The wife in this passage has something to teach any church or ministry leader with a handful of staff or ministry volunteers and dozens to hundreds of ministry beneficiaries, such as youth or church members. In doing this, I am not intending to remove this as an aspirational goal for women, wives or not, but instead saying that it is not only women who can learn from this woman's model. Let's take a look at the ways she attends to her multiple responsibilities. First of all, she is a compassionate provider for the household and for the needy. Verse 20, in verse 20, she is generous and compassionate toward the poor and other weaker recipients of the ministry. And verse 21, those she cares for, including her supervisees, are well supplied and ready for any contingency. Secondly, she delegates well to her servants. She teaches children and servants with patient kindness. In verse 15, she delegates well, provides secret service. This reflects all the work leaders do that no one thanks them for. In verse 26, she is wise, but her wisdom is expressed kindly, not impatiently. In verse 27, she is a good task and people manager and not lazy. And in verse 28, she may sound overworked, though she leads and her partners view her as happy. She does not spend the day complaining. Thirdly, she is not above tedious tasks, but develops her capacity and strengths. She is not anxious or fearful, but rather cheerful and hopeful for the future. In verse 16, she's a ministry entrepreneur looking for new opportunities for fruitful ministry. In verse 17, she's training for strengths. She invests in non-urgent but essential personal development tasks. In verse 18, she evaluates and appraises well. She works hard and plans ahead. In verse 19, she is not above tedious work. She doesn't just delegate, but also puts her own effort into the work. In verse 22, she is fully taken care of, even elegantly appointed. No one feels sorry for her. And in verse 25, dignity, that's poise, presence, serenity, protects her against unfair attacks. Hope, not anxiety about the future, is a strength for her and those she leads. Fourthly, her husband trusts that her efforts support the household rather than undermine it, so he can be involved in the wider community's concerns. In verse 11, she is trustworthy and dependable. She takes on tasks and completes them. In verse 12, she does him good. She's loyal all the days of her life. She's consistent. She doesn't nag or diminish, is patient with her partners. In 23, she frees up her partners to focus on their own roles of leadership. They are not distracted because her role is not handled competently. In verse 29 and 30, she is praised not for her beauty and charming words, but for her deeds and faith. God gives her wisdom, creativity, discipline, and fruitfulness. She fears the Lord, which is faith in God, rather than fearing the opinions of other people, or fearing failure, or fearing her supervisor. And finally, this capable team leader seeks raw materials and other resources to allow her to produce revenue to support the enterprise economy. In verse 13, she looks for raw materials and other resources to bring to the team. In verse 14, she brings in quality outside speakers, teachers, resources, ministry ideas. She reads widely. In verse 16, a ministry entrepreneur looking for new opportunities for fruitful ministry. In verse 18, she evaluates and appraises well, works hard, and plans ahead. And then finally, in verse 24, she's entrepreneurial. She helps others to succeed at their jobs. So let's bring this together and summarize how we see these priorities played out in ministry team leadership today. And you can see in this table the priorities of a ministry team leader. And I'm just going to focus on the right side of this table as we've covered the left column just now. First of all, the needy recipients of the ministry receive her provision, instruction, and compassion. She is thinking about the end recipients, the target market, the students, the children, the church members, the recipients of the ministry. Secondly, she's thinking about the supervisees. They receive her delegated instructions, coaching, and supervision, and resources for their ministry needs. This is done with a compassionate and kind attitude, and yet with focus on clarity, competence, and fruitful ministry. Thirdly, the leader herself is a diligent worker and can set aside time to develop her productive capacity. She doesn't fear burnout, but enjoys, even relishes, her ministry. Fourthly, the leader's supervisor is also an able delegator and can trust the capable ministry team leader to develop the ministry and communicate her needs when appropriate. And finally, the organizational needs and growth of the ministry are in her mind as she seeks ministry models, ideas, outside advisors, and entrepreneurial opportunities to advance the mission of the organization. See, the challenge of the Capable Wife poem is that she is extolled because she doesn't fail to attend to any of her responsibilities. She doesn't, for example, fail to focus on the direction and teaching of her supervisees because the poor and needy or her children are such a consuming concern that her supervisees are overlooked. But neither does she fail to communicate to her husband or to complicate his life because she is focused on those under her direction and care. She doesn't so focus on directing and developing the people that she herself is not growing and thriving, but she's thinking about the wider organization and how her efforts can enlarge the operation and its successful accomplishment of the mission. She attends to each area of responsibility in a way that the entire effort, not just one part of it, is growing and thriving. Now, I want to make this one caveat. I'm not trying to say that a husband is the wife's supervisor. That is certainly not my point I'm making with this study. I am saying that in the context of 3,000 years ago Israel, that assumption is a fair one and is present in this text. For my purposes here, I'm not assuming the gender of the ministry leader, their supervisees, or their supervisor. And by retaining the feminine gender in the descriptions, I'm hoping to help people imagine or acknowledge highly capable women in ministry leadership roles at all levels of an organization. But the larger point remains. We have much to learn from this very capable wife described and honored in this selection of biblical poetry. While, as a husband, I enjoy being married to such a talented wife, except admittedly without the vineyard, the flax, and all the household staff, as a ministry team member, I would be very grateful to be led by such a leader. So what does the Proverbs 31 wife say to you? What do you have to learn from her? I just have a couple questions for reflection. 1. Think about the various constituencies a ministry leader needs to keep in mind. Who are at the top of your priority list and are well served by your efforts? And who are further down and perhaps not as profoundly served by you? What might you do to rebalance your priorities? And secondly, sometimes the vast demands of the ministry make investing in or developing one's own ministry capacity a lower priority than busily focusing on meeting the needs of others. Yet taking time away from direct ministry to build strength, verse 17, makes her direct ministry more productive. So in what ways are you investing in your productive capacity for ministry? And how is that a challenge given pressing ministry demands? What steps may be taken to relieve that tension? Perhaps watching this video series is a part of your investment in your ministry capacity. If so, well done. Thank you for watching this video, which is based on Sketch of Leadership number 143, available for free at my website, and is also found in my book, Visionaries and Team Leaders, available on Amazon. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me get the word out.